so yeah, we'll go ahead and start. Because there is a lot tonight. After
Great.
all, the 12th century is a Renaissance. We normally think of the Renaissance, but there have been several in the history of the world, and the 12th century is one of them, not just in the Middle East, but also in Europe. And so over this more or less 100 years, it actually hangs over into the 13th century. There's a lot of, almost like a boiling pot of intellectual endeavors and faith synthesis, exploration of the link between the natural world, the human world, and the unseen world, the outer world and the inner world. How does all of that work together? People are interested in exploring all of those interfaces. It's certainly one of the most productive times in the whole history of Armenian writing, so much so that we call it the Silver Age, the most important period that did more for Armenian literature than any century since the invention of the alphabet.
Wow. That's interesting, the 12th century.
Yeah. And it's called the Silver Age, not just because of the quantity of writing that has survived from it, or the large number of people who are writing. In Armenian, we have the works of 20 writers from this time period. But also because of the quality of the writing, this is a time when writing begins to shade over from classical Armenian into spoken Armenian, something that doesn't really help us nowadays because Middle Armenian is neither modern nor classical. It has its own regulations, its own vocabulary, its own interests. But it's also a Renaissance because of the variety of types of things that are being written in it. We have histories, fables, riddles, poetry, sharakans, biblical commentaries, which, as we'll see, are a lot closer to the ones we expect nowadays, homilies, letters, other types of correspondence, manifestos, legal texts, public addresses in secular venues, and works of science. So these many writers worked and lived both in the Armenian homeland and in Cilicia. As you can see, in the century that we're going to be talking about, the 12th century, the whole area has pretty much been taken over by Turks, different types of Turks. And then, as we'll see in a little bit, also the Georgians. So there really is no Armenia in this time period, which isn't to say that there are not Armenians in the area. Of course there are. It's just to say that there is no governmental Armenian entity. As we'll see, there's something that tries to take its place in parts of this area, but still there is no Armenian state. And for part of this time period too, the Kingdom of Georgia, under rulers from the Bagratid clan, who they're Armenian, but they're also Georgian, and there's some identity questions there we'll come back and look at. They take over pretty much all of the what had been the Bagratid Kingdom of Armenia. You can see their land comes down beyond the Bagratid capital of Ani, beyond the capital of Devine, down to almost to Lake Van. And their territory runs all the way out to the Caspian Sea. Present-day Azerbaijan is located south in sort of what's now Iran. So the map it looks very different.
Looks different now, present day.
This is
Like-
not, yeah, now in the present day,
Yeah,
Armenia is right here.
okay.
And that's pretty much all of it. So things have changed, expanded, contracted, moved around. And then, of course, there were people in Cilicia as well, where it's on the way to having an Armenian governmental unit. Ultimately, there'll be an Armenian kingdom there. And then we're going to see there are some people who are at home in both sides of this bifurcated Armenian world. They're at home in the north, they're also at home in cosmopolitan Cilicia. So it wasn't new that Georgia had Bagratid kings. Ashot Kuropalates. Kuropalates is a Greek rank, governmental rank. One was very proud to have it, and so Ashot used it by preference. He was the first king of the dynasty in Georgia already in the 9th century. So there's a history of Armenians and Georgians living and working together.
Dr. Ervine, what does Bagratuni mean?
It means from the family of Bagarat.
Oh, so that was the family. That's kind of like his last name?
Yeah, that's his last name. It's his clan name.
Okay.
So this is a little depiction of him offering the model of a church to Christ.
Oh.
And it's interesting to see him. And in the 12th century, under 5 different kings, this Georgian/Armenian dynasty drew in displaced Armenian nobility from other areas where Turks were dominant. People who came to the region in order to join this vibrant hybrid Georgian Armenian kingdom. And the king who would take Georgia and big parts of what had been Armenia into the 13th century was King Tamar I. She was indeed a woman. She was not called queen. She was called king. It says something about her achievements and her character. So from among the Armenian nobility who served in this much larger Georgian state, there were 2 extraordinarily active Armenian brothers. One was named Zakare, one was named Ivane, and their last name was Zakarian, but they had also a nickname. They're from this mixed area, and they're an interesting pair. Their nickname was Yergaina Pazuk, so they have long arms. Whether that's literal or figurative, we don't know. But anyway, they established an Armenian populated semi-state under Georgian overlordship. So a large section of what had been Armenia was actually governed by these 2 Armenian brothers on behalf of the Georgian state. And they're interesting because Ivane was a Chalcedonian Christian. He belonged to the Georgian church. His brother Zakare did not. He was non-Chalcedonian and belonged to the Armenian church. So it's kind of indicative of the way things went in their territories, that there's a lot of tolerance and open-mindedness about these things.
Are these King Tamar's children or
No,
no?
they're not her children.
Okay.
They're totally Armenians. And so this is the area that they governed, this area in yellow. And you can see it's really pretty large. It goes from Artsakh in the east all the way past Kars in the west. It goes from Lori in the north down to Nakhichevan in the south. And it includes big chunks of historic Armenia, the province of Syunik, little bits of what had been Vaspurakan. So it's a significant chunk of real estate that they managed to unite in relative peace and prosperity for the time of their rule. And peace and prosperity mean that people have the time and the opportunity to create. They're not always looking over their shoulder to see where they next need to flee. And this whole region that had previously been the border area between Georgia and Armenia, up here north of Yerevan in Lori, all of that area blossomed into a very special kind of hybrid culture, so thoroughly hybrid that now both Georgians and Armenians claim these places. Georgians with less justification than Armenians, one has to say. So you have churches like this one. This is the monastery of Kopai. It's built into a mountainside. It's very beautiful. On the facade overlooking the road, you can see this from a significant distance away, is a very big Byzantine cross with two windows, the two natures of Christ. So, but it's an Armenian institution. So you have a very Chalcedonian looking architecture. And you go up the hill. It's a pretty steep climb, actually. Past remnants of this old thing, and you can, as you go up, you can get a better view of the cross. And then when you get to the top, you look around and you say, wait a minute, all of this church is frescoed.
Oh.
And if you didn't know, you would think you were in a Byzantine church. So there are caves around it too that were part of the monastic complex. And the kavit is gone, the front area, but the pillars still remain. And on the walls are inscriptions in both Armenian and Georgian. I expect Arman has been here. And when you go through the doorway, it really hangs out over the edge of nothing, this church. It's quite impressive. You go into the church, the whole thing is frescoes top to bottom. All that's left of the church is the altar apse, but it's painted top to bottom. It's
amazing that it stayed.
It is, absolutely. It would be even more amazing if somebody decided ever to maintain it. It would be great. We don't know if that's going to happen or not. Fortunately, somebody has taken a ton of photographs of it and has studied it. The study's in Russian, so it doesn't help me very much, but the pictures are great. So you have the hierarchs of the church. So you have Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory Nazianzus, and so on and so forth. Up here you have Christ. You have him giving communion to the disciples, etc. And if you go farther up the hill, you can look down on what used to be the church and you can see it. Plus, you can make yourself really, really, really sick looking down into that valley.
That's on the back side of it. The front side is the one that had the cross.
Yeah. So where you see this triangle, the cross on the facade below the triangle.
Okay.
Then up the road, more familiar to Arman, is a fortress and church called Akhtala.
My iPhone. Oh, wow.
And you can see there's a fortification around it. And the church from inside, you can see another one of those Byzantine crosses. When you go up to the complex, this is the gate that you go through. Right across, you can see this building in the background on the right. That is a copper mine, which is an incredible polluter in the area. So you look across and there's this green water. I mean, it's neon green with all the effluent from the mining operations. It's beautiful color. And then you realize that it's absolutely and completely poisonous. And the church is like this. You can see that the little portico, the cavite, was built later because it obstructs the cross that was on the facade. And we're going to see carvings very similar to this again in the same vicinity, the same geographical vicinity. So this was one of the Zacharian brothers' fortifications and churches for controlling the valley that joins Georgia and Armenia. And the carving on it is fabulous. No two capitals are the same on the facade of this church. There are all these beautiful blind pillars, and then you have a complete variety of motifs that surmount them. This church too is completely frescoed on the inside. It's done better in terms of its preservation than Kopayat has because it's not open. It's still structurally sound. So you can get a better idea of what Kopayat probably looked like in its better days. Down here you have all the bishops of the Universal Church, the fathers of the Universal Church, Christ distributing communion to the apostles. He's on both sides of the window, in one handing out the bread and on the other the wine, and then Christ in glory above. But the entire church is like this. It's not just the altar apse. So on the walls, you have the full cycle of the life of Christ, plus that's surmounted by frescoes of saints. You probably recognize the guy in the middle here, that's Saint Simeon the Stylite, shown on his pillar. Down below, you have the resurrected Christ. Here's the whole thing. It's not a very clear picture, but it gives you an idea of how much decoration there is in this building. So you have that going on in the north, this beautiful kind of half Georgian, half Armenian melded culture. In Cilicia, meantime, people are mingling their fortunes with the arriving crusaders, many of whom settle permanently in the Middle East, but their presence there, oddly, is not permanent. Their principalities float in and out of existence. They too have a blended culture, but it's blended European, Armenian, Arabic, and Byzantine. And so the development of the Cilician state is going to have to take into account all of those players and the mix of cultures and influences that somebody who's going to rule that region had to negotiate and find a way between, changed the everything Armenian culture in that area. So you have the first king of the Cilician kingdom, we're getting a little out of order because it'll be a few years before he comes into existence, carries a French fleur-de-lis. He carries a European royal orb in his other hand. He's seated on what's effectively a Byzantine throne. So, and yet the inscriptions on his coins are in Armenian. So this too is a blended culture. It's just blended out of different things. And so Armenians in the area, especially Armenians in the church, are going to be invited in the 12th and 13th century to really examine themselves in the light of what they're seeing in other Christians in the area, and to consider whether their own traditions are actually as ancient as they think they are, or whether some of them are relatively recent, and maybe one could consider changing them. So this will be the time period where Armenians begin to change their liturgical vestments, for example. This is the time when Armenians will start using a bishop's pointy hat, a European way of doing things. Now, it has very practical application, Because if you're traveling as a priest and you have to carry around with yourself like a crown, the things that your average parish priest uses to do badarak, you have to carry like an extra large hat box with you. Whereas with one of those Episcopal crowns, you just simply take it, you snap it together, and it folds flat. And then when you arrive, you can push it out again and you can use it. It's the size of your head again. So a lot of changes will happen in things Armenian within the church, and that you can imagine there'll be some friction over that. Nobody really likes to have that kind of stuff changed from the way we've always done it, whether you're an Armenian, Episcopalian, or whatever you are. So that being said, we're dealing with mixed cultures. We're going to begin, our first writer is going to be somebody from the North Country. He has a funny name. He's called Hovannes Sargavak Vartabed. So John Deacon Vartabed. He actually got his start in the 11th century, so I kind of debated whether we should look at him last week or this week. So he ended up in this week, because the end of his career was very, very productive time for him. He was a native of Artsakh, but he lived for many productive years in that mixed Georgian Armenian cultural area that we just looked at, only slightly farther south. At the monasteries of Sanahin, they're twin monasteries, the monasteries of Sanahin, which you can see here, monasteries that were Bagratid built, covered in very beautiful and excellent quality Armenian graffiti. And yet that have a Byzantine cross on them. So there you have totally Byzantine Armenian cross. You have the two windows, the two natures of Christ, but at the same time, somebody has opened a third one so that it's not quite so in your face. And it has a wonderful kavi, a wonderful area, multi-use area in front of the church proper. It has a great view. And it's right across from its sister monastery at Hagbat, where he also served and taught. So there's the Kavit again, just beautiful, beautiful space. You can see the floor is paved with famous people's tombs. And it's right across from Hagbat, which is built into the hill. You can see that there's a roof, and then there's a slope of grass and dirt around it. And of this building, only one piece of it sticks up above the ground on this side. The bell tower wasn't there yet at the time. But the inside of it, the setting up of the space, the symmetry of it, totally Armenian in its proportions and its way of doing things. You could almost turn this into an abstract form. It's one of those domes you just stand and you look up at it until your neck is tired. It stands over the Kavit in front of that church. And then you have this big complex of buildings that kind of grew and morphed over time. But when you get close up to it, you see geometric patterns that are right at home in an Islamic world. You see Armenian inscriptions, and you'll see Georgian inscriptions as well. So Hovannes Sargavak is very at home, again, in this kind of a mixed culture. Here's a really pretty khachkar from there. And in fact, the place is famous for its khachkars. There's a passageway that just has them lined up against the walls. You can run your camera out of battery very easily just in this one passageway. And it has things like this, which you can
What
see
is
as a
that?
monogram.
Oh, that's a monogram.
So it has a bunch of different letters. I think this is Saki's Vartabed, maybe. I'm not sure. So in this kind of an atmosphere, this is fun. We're not quite sure what this is depicting. Is it Mary? Is it a person, normal person? What is it exactly? It's also home to an extremely famous Khachkar. There are very few in Armenia, Armenian tradition, that have Christ on the cross. There's a little family of these things. They mostly come from this time period. And they're mostly the work of one or two artists. So for a while, there is a trend for these things. If we had more time, we'd talk about its iconography. It's very extraordinary. And it sits up on a platform right about head height on me. And so you have to really look up to see it. And then you walk out of the collection of Khachkars to look at the incredible view of the valley. So he worked here in Georgian-controlled Armenia for many years before finally going on to teach at the school in Ani. And as he wrote many types of materials. He was a calendar calculator. He was interested in celestial phenomena. He was also a poet, and he has this sweet poem that he wrote to the little bird that built its nest outside his window. And the same kind of bird still builds the same kind of nests on those buildings today. So I had to have a picture of one. And when he got to Ani, Hovhannes Sargavak was instrumental in maintaining the quality of Armenian monastic education there. And he really built up the school. He taught a mind-boggling array of subjects. And at the same time offered youth programs and other types of things. It's quite possible that he actually never became a priest, and that's why he is Hovhannes Sargavak. It was not required that you be a priest to become a teacher. Perhaps he didn't, or perhaps there were just a lot of Hovhannesses in the area. And so when he was younger, he was known as Hovhannes Sargavak to distinguish him from the other Hovhannesses, and it just stuck. So we really don't know whether he ever actually became a priest or not. But his view of the church's role in education was that it should provide an education that leads first and foremost to good character. If your education isn't making you a better Christian, then there's something wrong with it. There's something missing from it. And in his view, the ideal student, the ideal monk, the ideal priest would be a person who had both living holiness and deep learning. That was your ideal. That was what you aimed for. A kind of scholar saint is what you wanted to produce. Now, obviously, not everybody's cut out for that. And if you had to choose between developing your personal holiness, your personal sanctity, and developing a learned, erudite approach to life, the spirituality, he said, was more important. It's more important that you get to be a truly good and holy person than it is that you become extremely learned. And he was a very well-known person in his area, whether he was in Ani or whether he was in the north. And people came to him for answers or input on difficult questions that they were having. And it wasn't just Armenians, other people did too. So for example, there's a letter to him well, we don't have the letter to him, we have his response to it, from a bishop in Georgia who wanted to know, what about this very odd verse in the Psalms that refers to dragons? And it seems like his local clergy and their parishioners were having some difficulty about this verse and wanted to know, is it real? Huh? What about dragons? Because dragons are prominent in the mythology of both Armenia and Georgia. And so he responds with a combination of, and we learn a lot from this letter. He responds with a combination of folklore that the bishop's people would be familiar with, etymologies of words, and some contemporary science, where he says, actually, the whole idea of dragons in Armenia and the Caucasus region comes from a meteorological phenomenon up there, which sounds almost like a tornado. So he says the villagers call it a dragon when you have a wind that circulates. It comes up from the ground gradually and it grows and it carries debris with it. And as the debris increases, you get this dark kind of twisting thing. Sounds like a tornado to me. And he says peasants call it the dragon. It's just a piece of wind, just a phenomenon. Now, you had an interesting little piece for this evening by him, which also tells us some interesting stuff about the area where he's living. It's entitled, "To Those Who Consider Flesh Unclean." And this kind of implies, and it gets more specific as it comes through as we go through the text. It becomes clear that some of the Old Testament food regulations are being followed in this area. In a mixed family, you can imagine there being tension. In a neighborhood, you can imagine there being tension. It's not much fun to be walking home to your dish of white beans when your neighbor is cooking salmon and you can smell it outside. So you can kind of see how this would come up. So he starts out by saying the reason why Armenians fast is not because there's something essentially wrong with meat products. So it may be that Byzantines were saying that about Armenians, and it may be that Armenians actually believed it in some cases. And he says, no, there's nothing wrong with bodies, which is what flesh is, because after all, Jesus took one, so it's okay in that regard. And then he talks a little bit about the one nature and the two natures, which again tells you you're in a Chalcedonian, non-Chalcedonian context. And then he gets into the foods. There is nothing to prevent people on any day or at any time from enjoyment of foods excessively with insatiable greed. And then they do not scruple to berate those who with thanksgiving and prayer approach the special days with faith and modest behavior. So he says people's attitude is, if it's bad for me, how can it be good for you? If it's good for me, how can it be bad for you? So if you're a Greek or a Georgian, and you're not planning to fast in the same way that your Armenian neighbors do, he says, fine. You know, it's your tradition. You do what you're going to do with your tradition, but don't say anything about your Armenian neighbors. Don't say anything about, oh, those Armenians, they're weird. They think meat is a terrible thing. They think meat is nasty. Not necessarily. They're just approaching the holy days with moderation. And one would assume vice versa. If you're an Armenian and you fast the full 40 days of Lent, no animal products whatsoever, including no fish, no eggs, no cheese, none of that, then you don't get to call your Byzantine neighbors gluttons. Because chances are they're also being thankful for what they're eating. They're also probably, not pigging out. They're eating in a normal manner. So everybody just leave everybody alone. And then as he comes down a little farther, you see something very weird is happening. The last paragraph on the first page. Who gave you authority to eat things strangled with their blood? Either game, birds, or animals. That's a regulation directly out of the Old Testament. That's a kosher regulation. So it sounds like there are people in that area who are violating that regulation. And it sounds like there are people in the area, probably Armenians, who are keeping those regulations and who are killing their meat in a kosher fashion. In other words, draining its blood before it's eaten, and so on and so forth. And we're going to see this as we look at one of our other texts this evening, that the northern and northeastern areas of Armenia were and still are actually really conservative when it comes to their attitude towards things like this. The Old Testament regulations, the Old Testament purity regulations, the Old Testament kosher regulations are meaningful to them. And so, yes, they are scandalized when they come across someone who's eating blood sausage, or they come across somebody who is not draining the blood out of their pheasant before they devour it. And then he also disapproves of certain ways of killing. I don't know whether any of us are familiar with these. Who allowed you to take their life?
Yeah.
Not to mention those whose necks you wring either with your hands or with a garrote. Which of your anonymous teachers allowed you to eat animals unclean according to the law, and to forbid the indubitably clean ones to people who rightly accept this positive regulation? So you can kind of see where the lines are drawn in the marketplace between where Byzantine Chalcedonians shop and where Armenians shop, and that they don't agree with one another. It does not please me, he says on the second page, to see the excess of some in eating such foods. And then he's back on the Lenten thing, especially capable people with strong bodies who are healthy, free from illness and disease, and especially the young among them, who need to wither a little the flower of their flesh and their natural desires, who should contend against sin, refraining not only from such foods and from wine, but from every luxury, and for the least surfeit of food, in fact, in other words, from overeating at all. This is really important for younger people, especially to develop disciplined habits of diet. So it's just kind of a little interesting window into areas of conflict that could come up in a place with multiple cultures around something that was considered religiously. So it's interesting because North and Northeast Armenia are very conservative, very religiously strict, and so on. One of the functions of a Vartabed in those areas was to settle points of law and discipline among the faithful in the community. And so priests who faced a knotty problem in confession, for example, or people who needed to know how to direct their flock in moral matters, or people who were having conscience pangs over something in their own experience, would seek out a specialized Vartabed for advice in, how does worship accommodate what I've done? Or I don't feel like I behaved in a proper manner towards whatever. How do I fix that? And so David of Ganzak is one of those specialized Vartabeds who had authority in these matters. His opinions were highly valued by people. And around the middle of the 12th century, just like 1080 or something like that, he was asked to put together a kind of handbook of frequently asked questions. And it kind of boggles your mind that some of these come up frequently. but they apparently did. And so he puts the frequent issue, and then he puts the appropriate response for the culture of his region and time. And this, he's one of the people I've often wondered what was inside his head, because he actually came from elsewhere, and then he was assigned, let me see if I have a map of it. He was assigned to Ganzak, which is now Ganja in Azerbaijan. So he's out there beyond the boonies. He's out there having been well educated in a nice vank in a good area. This is where they send him to hang out for the rest of his days with these hillbilly types. And he learned to love them. He learned to take their strange issues seriously, because he realized that, you know, they are having spiritual angst over some of these things. So here's what the area looks like around Ganzak. I can't find many pictures of it because, again, it is in Azerbaijan right now. Here's a church in the area, super simple Armenian church. There are Armenian churches left in Azerbaijani territory. Super simple cross carvings. You can see it's kind of a rough, not very sophisticated architecture and art, and it kind of goes with the rest of the picture of the people. This is another Armenian church that has managed to survive. I don't know that it's still a church. There's at least one that's been turned into like a movie theater or something. And you can see the remnants of that mixed Georgian Armenian culture. There's a super tall dome like you would find on a Georgian church. Armenian ones are usually shorter than that. So anyway, in addition to providing us with a very interesting window on the kinds of matters that were distressing people in his area, the principles that underlay his thinking are pretty striking. So as you look at this, what jumps out to you as some of the, if you were to look at them overall and say, what categories of issues are exercising the minds of his people and causing them trouble? Yeah, confession and communion. Absolutely. Sacraments in general. This is a very church-going, get your kid baptized, even down to things like why a monk can't be your child's godparent, even if he's your relative. So you're in a place where families sleep in one bed. What happens if in the middle of the night, when you're sound asleep, you roll over and you smother your baby? And then you have this weird, the first one, Canon 21 of his advice. You look at this and you go, wait a minute. So Muslims are bringing their kids for baptism, and the priests are saying, okay, come on in. Why does he think Muslims are seeking baptism for their children? And then why should you not do it? You can imagine it's going to be pretty awkward if you don't, but why should you not? He's like, you realize that the point of baptism is that it starts you on your lifetime of Christian education. So what these people are actually signing on to is to have their child taught as a Christian. Most of them don't know that that's what they're signing up for. If you explain that to them, chances are they're not going to want it, or you'll be able to come up with some kind of compromise, other ceremony for them, because he says they think it's magic. They think it's some way that Christians protect their kids. Like Achilles, his mother dunked him in the river to make him invulnerable, but she was holding on to his heel in order to dunk him. And later on, he was killed by an arrow to his heel. So that one little unprotected spot. So he said they're thinking of baptism that way. It's like magic water. Your kid won't get sick if he's been dunked in the Christian font. So he says you need to explain to them, no, what you're signing on for is for your kid to go to Christian school, for your kid to be raised outside the Muslim faith. You don't want to do that. If you want me to come to your house, or you want me to come to some venue and you want to have me say prayers over your child for God's protection of your child, that's great. I'll do that. You want me to sprinkle water on your kid? That's fine. I'm happy to do it. But don't come to a church for a baptism. Because afterwards, I'm going to be knocking on your door going, it's time for school. Let's have little Ahmed come and learn. And it's not going to be good. And then it talks about godparents, which matters again, because these are the people who are responsible to raise this child in the Christian faith. These are the people who are responsible to teach the child, to take the child to Christian school, and so on and so forth. So he would be very against the whole idea of having some influential or wealthy person become the godchild of your baby, or the godparent of your baby, so that in the future you might find advantage from that connection. He's like, no, this is a teaching thing. This is why he says women are not godparents in his culture, in his time, because women have so much to do already that there's no way that they're going to have the time to take on somebody else's kid and also teach them and raise them and all of that. He's like, no, it needs to be guys because they're hanging out and they've got a lot more spare time on their hands. They can drag themselves away from the coffee shop or wherever it is that they're hanging out, the gym, and they can do their duty by this child. All right, then we have this weird question 24. What kind of a place are we in? If anyone in ignorance celebrates the Eucharist with wine into which, or bread onto which, a mouse has fallen, all the holy vessels which have been polluted, together with the chalice cover, shall be rejected. And the priest shall repent for 3 weeks in fasting. What is going on? What is the underlying principle? What kind of a society are we dealing with here? So this is probably a rural setting, or it's agricultural, so there are lots of rodents around, or there's negligence going on. So the priest or the parish council or whoever it is that's responsible for the upkeep of the building and the safety of things like the wine and the bread needs to be disciplined. How does the mouse even get into your wine supply? Oh, and then there are other ones I didn't copy about what if the mouse actually has not died yet in the wine and you could fish it out and throw it, into the field. Is it okay then to use the wine? And he's like, no, it's not. You don't know what kind of germs rodents carry. It's not acceptable. So
Whoa.
be really careful because you're not going to have more wine until the next harvest. He also has some other ones, I don't think I included them, that were issues that were brought to him by altar servers and priests. Oh, here it is, 29.
Oh, 29.
The fancy word for belch is eructate, which is why that's here. But if the priest burps on the altar, what do? Obviously, you've just behaved disrespectfully, one would think, by sharing your bodily functions in that sacred space. So what does he say about it? It depends on why. So if you're hiccuping and belching because you drank too much the night before, then 15 days you're not doing badara. Remember that in most churches, there's more than one priest, so you're not depriving the people. You're giving yourself kind of time to dry out. If you are taking a drug that causes this, that's a whole different matter. If it's something you ate, then the question is, so why were you eating before Badarak? We don't do that. And so on and so forth. If you were absolutely outright drunk and you were still hungover when you came to Badarak to celebrate, he says 120 days, no Badarak for you. Now, remember, you're being paid by Badarak. That's where your salary comes from, whether you're being paid in chickens or you're being paid in cash. So it's a serious penalty. If the person actually vomits at the altar, and it happens more than once, no more Badaraks for you ever. You're just an animal. You're behaving like an animal. So it makes you think there must have been situations where this happened. And so the underlying principle is, don't drink the night before Badarak. Certainly don't get drunk before the night before Badarak. And don't pig out before Badarak. And you have to think to yourself, here's this highly educated Vatabed who's dealing with this kind of stuff on a day-to-day basis. He must have had a great sense of humor and a lot of patience to have made it through his career. And then you can see in 34, this comes up still. If a priest is celebrating the Eucharist and is summoned in an emergency for baptism or communion, so somebody is dying, they want last rites, or a baby is born and is in dire straits and may die. He says, let him not make a case of conscience out of it and delay and linger. Let him conclude the stage in the Eucharist that he has reached and cover it up. Go give baptism to the child or communion to the person, and then return and take up where he left off. So life and death situations are more important than doing the Eucharist. That's an interesting principle as well. People matter more. And then 36, you can imagine this happening. Is it proper for the priest to pronounce a curse during the Badarak? And he's like, oh, really? It's a place of joy. It's a place not of wrath, but of meekness, not of confusion, but of peace, not one for cursing those who curse and persecute us. So if somebody does something wrong on the altar, or if you can hear somebody in the church doing or saying something and it's pissing you off, you still do not get to cuss them out. Not during Badarak. If you want to cuss them out later, maybe you can get away with it. But on the altar, you are not to say anything unbecoming, no matter how aggravated you are. So now we're going to move south to consider some of the writings that are emerging out of Cilicia. So Ignatios Sevlerency, Ignatios from Black Mountain, is our author. He's got a really good story attached to him. In this time period, biblical exegesis, writing a full commentary on something, was considered the crowning achievement of one's career. And that activity was reserved for the best of the best. Because after all, writing a commentary, even though the commentaries are longer and more discursive than they used to be, you're still not writing something to put into the hands of the faithful Bible studying congregation. It's still very labor intensive to produce a book. What you're doing when you write a commentary is you are distilling your insights and your learning for your peers, for other teachers, and for your successors, who are then going to take what you have said and mold it and form those insights in order to make them usable to the faithful in their own time period, make them digestible by people in the form of homilies or other types of instruction. You're not going to share that commentary per se with your people. So to be a commentator, one had to have fully absorbed the whole of the exegetical tradition in Armenian and many things from exegetical traditions outside the Armenian world. And you had to have ruminated on that material so thoroughly that you had received your own insights to add to theirs. So in a way, you're building a structure of insight into the scriptures, and to add a new story onto that sacred building had to be done carefully. It had to remain architecturally sound. So a man like Ignatios was very unwilling to undertake the task of writing a commentary on the Gospel of Luke, even though he had been a stellar student in the best monastic school of Cilicia at the time, Garmirvank, which was also the Katolikos Saran in Kesun. He was a fellow student of the future Katolikos Krikor III Pahlavuni and his brother Nerses, later to be Nerses Shnorali. He was also a classmate to a man named Sarkis Shnorali, who was a very respected commentator. And Ignatios was just intimidated by the thought of trying to write a commentary that would not be embarrassing compared to theirs. He was specifically commissioned by Katolikos Krikor III to write a commentary on Luke, and he said, no, I'm not worthy. And then we're told he had a dream. So he's dissed the Katolikos' direct order to him to write this thing. He just can't see himself doing it. And then he has this dream. In his dream, he goes to heaven. He dies in his dream. And when he gets to heaven, there's this beautiful house. Big windows, gardens. And he can see through the lighted windows of the house. There's this wonderful kind of hall. There's food. And around the table are all the commentators of antiquity that he really is like, if you were to think, who do I want to talk with once I'm dead? All of them were there in his dream. And he was like, oh, and he walked up to the house and he knocked on the door. He screwed up his courage, knocked on the door, and they go, who's there? He says, I'm Ignatios from Black Mountain. And they're like, who are you? I'm Ignatios from Black Mountain. And they're like, oh, you, go away. This gathering is only for commentators. For people who have actually written the commentary. He woke up like in a cold sweat. And he wrote to the Katolikos and he said, I'm sorry, I will write the commentary. And he started immediately. And the result is his commentary on Luke. So this is the area that he's in. This is the suburbs of Kesun. You can see the Black Mountain in the background. This is what it looks like up close. It's all these wonderful folded landscape with little vanks and hermitages and things tucked away in those valleys. And there's hills on top of the hills. It's beautiful landscape. So his commentary on the Gospel of Luke was printed once in Istanbul in the 19th century. And some of what he says is traditional and some of it is his very own.
Dr. Ervine,
Yeah.
that the risky part, where he didn't want to do the commentary, it was not the traditional stuff, the things that he was to
Exactly.
write from his own, right?
Yep. He did not feel worthy to add to what had already been said.
Right. And this is where my question is, how do you know that whatever you are about to write is coming from Holy Spirit?
That was exactly his problem. There are some clues for you. One is, does it contradict something that has already been said? If it doesn't, that's a point in its favor. So if it builds on something else, but it doesn't reverse something else, that's fine. So for example, if you have this verse in Proverbs that says, a crooked scale and an unfair weight are an abomination to the Lord. So if you comment on that passage and you say, well, actually, that's not true, that's not a legitimate way to look at it, no matter how you go on to explain it. So there's that. You want to make sure that it's harmonious with what's come before. It doesn't have to be identical, but it has to be it has to fit, has to have the same. You can develop the color, but it has to be the same color. It's really interesting that at the very beginning, it's talking about Zechariah being in the temple. It's talking about him entering into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement in order to offer the prayers. And it's really interesting. The angel of the Lord said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayers have been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son. Okay, so he notes the angel is really gentle and kind. And he says, what's in Zechariah's mind as soon as he hears that, do not be afraid, Zechariah. What comes to his mind is going to be Daniel 10, where the angel comes to Daniel and says the same thing. Do not be afraid, beloved man. Don't be afraid, God loves you. Yes, you're having a weird vision right now with an angel in it, but don't worry about it. And according to Ignatius, that's the first thing that's going to come to Zechariah's mind because he is well trained in scripture. So when he hears the phrase, do not be afraid, his mind is automatically going to go to Daniel. And so he will know, he doesn't say this, but whoever is expanding on this in a homily is going to know. In other words, what you are about to hear, what I am about to say to you, the angel says, is prophetic. You right now are in the position of Daniel. And I'm going to tell you something that's for the benefit of the people going forward. And then he goes back and he says, I want to talk about this. Your prayers have been heard. Now, when I was growing up, I was taught, what was Zechariah praying for? Maybe you've heard the same. Your prayers have been heard, says the angel. And you're going to have.
He was praying for his wife to have a baby.
And Ignatius says, not a chance.
Yeah.
For that. Where is he? He's in the temple. He's on the holiest day of the year, the Day of Atonement for the people. The day when the only day the high priest goes into that area of the temple. There is a set prayer which has to be said. That set prayer is very short, and it has to do with the salvation of the people. And so the angel says, good prayer. God heard that. So you're going to have a son who is part of that. You've been praying right now for the salvation of the people. Your son is going to be part of that salvation. You're going to have a son, not just because you want a son, not just because you're a good guy and your wife's a good woman, so you should have a kid. This is the context in which you get this child. This child, I am prophesying to you, as I did to Daniel, this child is going to be part of the future salvation of the nation. And so he goes on to say, so Zechariah is struck dumb, not as a punishment, because he didn't believe the angel. Of course, it's a little much to take in. The angel is expecting that. So he's struck dumb so that he won't tell anybody about this. Oh my God, I've been praying for the salvation of Israel, and now I'm going to get to be part of it. People are going to look at you like you're crazy. So we're just not going to let you talk about it until the kid is born. That's a completely different interpretation of it than what I grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
Where he was praying for a son. And so God said, well, you know, finally, after all this time, you proved yourself, so you're going to have a son. And that's great. And because you don't believe it, I'm going to not let you talk for 9 months.
Right.
It's
You think it's punitive. It's not punitive.
No. So this is part of what Ignatius has thought about all these years. So how you read these stories depends on what you think God is about. So if you think God is angry and punishing, you're going to read it one way. If you think that God is interested in looking for people who want to be involved in the good that can be done in the world, then you're going to read it in a different way. And so he's encouraging people who will use his commentary to do the latter, to look at it through that very much more positive and loving lens. All right. And then he talks about how this child is going to, he puts the Old Testament and the New Testament together. So John is going to be Elijah for a new age. And then when he talks about verse 17b, first of all, in 17a, he talks about John's mission is to reconcile people. John's mission is to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children. But he also says, John is there to bring unbelievers to wisdom. This is an even greater power than to have all virtue contained in oneself. Even Jesus, who does all things with ease and makes them change, said about the exceeding difficulty of this, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered your children, and you would not. He said this not because his forceful power was unable to prevent unbelief, but because he does not wish to force anyone, since he made us rational and with free will, and does not want to remove what he himself has given. Instead, he left it for people to willingly choose what they prefer. And then he talks about John coming to prepare a people for the Lord. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a people prepared for the Lord, and so on. And that's pretty much the tone of the entire commentary. It's how does everything thereafter fulfill this? I wanted to include Mukhtar Heratzi amongst the authors for tonight, because he is one of the two that we will look at who bridge both worlds. You can see him here in this manuscript illumination. He's the little guy in white at the right of the picture, holding some kind of an instrument. And the man on the left is Nerses Shnorhali. And the two of them are having a discussion about astronomy from the looks of things. So how in the world did these guys get acquainted with each other? Because Mukhtar is from the place where the red spot is on your screen. You can see the Persian Gulf in blue at the bottom. You can see the Caspian Sea over to the right, the top. And little tiny Lake Urmia is where he's from. He's a Barskahai and grew up very far away from Cilicia. He's also not exactly in the sphere of influence of the Georgian Armenian kingdom either. So he's growing up in his own little world. He's a Persian speaker and an Armenian speaker, just natively. And Persia in this time is known for its medical science. So he became interested in that. And in his medical studies, he also learned Arabic, which was the kind of new frontier for medical care. And he studied traditional Greek medicine as well. So going back to Hippocrates and people like that, Galen. And then we don't quite know how he did it, but his career blossomed not in his home area, but in Cilicia, where he's a good enough physician that his name now adorns the Mukhtar Heratsi Medical School in Yerevan. And it's an imposing structure. I'm not sure it's actually in this building anymore. I think it may have moved, but this was the traditional medical university. And there's a medal that's offered to people who've provided stellar medical service in his name. So you can get the Mukhtar Heratsi scholarship, you can get the Mukhtar Heratsi medal for service to medical science and so on. And his reputation was stellar in his own lifetime as well. So it's possible that he got to know Nerses as a patient. We remember that Nerses had a life-threatening illness in his 30s sometime. And it's always possible that, of course, for someone who's that close to the Catholicos, they'll try to get the best physician around. So it's possible that they met each other at that point. But they became friends and they bonded over their common scientific interests, which included things like astronomy. So Nerses Shnorali is not just a poet and someone who is interested in scripture and liturgy. He's also quite interested in the sciences. The short piece that I gave you from his major work, which is on different types of fevers, is very interesting to read. It was also really, really difficult to translate because he writes not in classical Armenian, he writes in vernacular Armenian from his own time period. And it includes a lot of technical terminology in Arabic, sometimes in Turkish. So you can see this mixed language that people were speaking. It has some Arabic in it, it has some Persian in it, it has some Greek in it, has some Armenian, obviously. It has its own grammar rules or lack thereof. But once you make your way through it, you can see that some of his ideas are really interesting. And he tells you, I'm going to write about this stuff in Armenian, by which he means the spoken Armenian of his, that he was used to. Because this, unlike a biblical commentary, is written for practitioners. It's written for everybody. So you want it to be understandable to the people who are going to be using it. Other doctors, people who are medical students, even the person who not involved in medicine professionally still wants to know what's going on with their body. So he's aiming this not at a totally learned audience necessarily, but a general audience of people interested in medicine. And he makes a little pun in the title of his book. His name is Mukhtar, which means consolation or relief. And so the book in Armenian is called Mkhitarutun Chermans. So what Mkhitar would do to fevers, as well as being the relief for the comforting of fevers. What did you notice about it? His is very practical, and it's very interesting because he has some ideas that are quite contemporary for us now. So, for example, no disease is insignificant. So if you're not feeling well, there's a reason. You need to find out what it is, and then you need to take care of it. So don't just shove it off and say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. And he also says you want to observe very carefully what's going on with you. So for example, if you have a fever, how long do you have it for? When did it start? Where does it, how did you get this thing? How long is it likely to last? And then he's going to talk, he talks about fevers that just last for a day. And he ties them to your psychological state. He says these things can come. You can be so anxious about something that you make yourself sick. You can be so anxious that your body overheats. You can be so worried about something that it actually changes your body temperature. And so if that's the case for you, if what you have is an anxiety-induced fever, then take the day off, relax, take a nice nap, go to the bathhouse and have a nice warm soak. And when you get out, go have some nice kind of lightly cooked chicken. Give yourself some fresh fruit. Get a nice glass of something like white wine with water in it, so you're not, imbibing too much alcohol, but you're still getting the benefit of the fact that it's a fruit-based drink. So treat yourself well. Cool things off. Give yourself the opportunity to relax and not think about whatever it is that's bothering you, and you'll find your fever goes down.
I think we should try all of these.
I think so.
I like them.
Yeah. And then he also says you can kind of tell where the fever is coming from by physical signs. It's not just the heat, that you just feel a little feverish and off. But he says also when you pee, your body will tell you by what it's sending out of itself. It will indicate to you what's going on inside. So if you're peeing a dark color, for example, you're not hydrated. Go drink stuff. Go, hydrate yourself from the outside as well. Hang out in a nice pool someplace, whether it's cool or whether it's warm, depends on the weather. Make sure that you get the quantity of water in you back up, so that it can be used by your body to damp down the fever, to quench the fever, and so on and so forth. So that symptomology, the looking at what comes out of you tells you what's in you kind of idea. And then he also says fevers and so on are passed around the body by the blood. So that's, again, the circulatory system. We now know this is true. And you have the option, he talks about it in other places, that there's what he calls mold in your blood. So he's thinking about viruses and bacteria, that those things pass through the body by the bloodstream. And so if you want to get rid of them, you're going to have to change what's inside and make it go outside. So you might want to consider a laxative, get stuff out of your system. You might want to consider drinking a lot more, get it out of your system, flush stuff out, so that what was inside you no longer is, and it's not going to cause you trouble. Do not, if you're having a fever, do not eat spicy stuff. Do not eat hot, dry things. Because you can make your situation a whole lot worse. But I like the whole idea of, massage the person if they're feeling really tense. feed them young chicken and pigeon. He says it can, if you're anxious, it'll hurt your digestion as well. So if you're having digestive problems, the first thing you want to look for is something that's stressing you, because it's changing the digestive enzymes. And it's changing the way that your body cooks food, the way that your body processes food. So, and if you find yourself losing weight and you're kind of starting to look a little bit sunken in, it's just stress. It's very probably stress. And the stress will appear in your cheeks. So he said, go have a look in the mirror. If you're not feeling well and you're thinking it might be stress, you can tell from your own face. And then you're supposed to get these wonderful things like oil of chamomile, oil of lotus, oil of violet. Have some poppies, have some opium. It's good for you. These things will help you out. You're going to relax if you have some opium. There's also a really good medical historian in Armenia who's written stuff since I did this translation. I should check her work as well. Stella Vartanyan. She's a doctor and she's also a medical historian. Then it says you can, oh, Zare would love this on the last page. Quickly purge the body with several kinds of fruit juices and a dilution of honey and vinegar.
This was wonderful.
Yeah, he's one of my very favorites.